Welcome everyone back again. It's very hard to follow on from such a wonderful and thought-provoking panel, which will be making us all rethink our support for and dedication to charity law, and whether in some spaces charity law cannot do all that we expect it to do. But we do have, perhaps to help us open our eyes to the policy changes that could occur, we have got the Minister who will be presenting online in a moment. So Andrew Leigh, who's the Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury, we are very lucky to have him here speaking to us. He's the federal member for Fenner in the ACT, and prior to being elected, he was Professor of Economics at the ANU and holds a PhD in Public Policy from Harvard. And I think of great excitement to many in the room, he's actually done some research in the area that we're talking about today. And so that is a bit of a change in terms of hearing from ministers in the charity law space. He's also said he is the most excited minister to ever be the Minister for Charities. So with that introduction, Dr. Leigh, I will hand over to you with great pleasure to listen to what you have to say for us on charity regulation in Australia and New Zealand 10 years on. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me along to speak, and apologies for addressing you virtually. I'd love to be with you there in Melbourne. Can I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people in whose land I'm speaking to you from today? Dara Nuna, Dara Ngunnawal, Yungu, Nalamanyan, Dunamanyan, Ngunnawal Wadi, Dara Wadi, Dindi, Wangarlin Jin Yin. I want to also acknowledge any Indigenous participants present today and commit myself as a member of the Albanese government to the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. And you'll be hearing more about that from the Prime Minister at Garma over the weekend. As has been said, I'm probably as excited as anybody ever to take the job of the Assistant Minister for Charities. I love charities. I've worked with them collaboratively over the 9 years that Labor's been in opposition, where I've held the front bench portfolio for charities. I feel I've had an opportunity over that 9 years to understand many of the issues and the challenges that the sector faces. And as someone put it in a forum, it's nice to have a charities minister who likes charities. I really do. I think you have a critical role to play in building a stronger Australia. And I want to start just by talking about some of the broader social and political context in which we find ourselves. Over the last 40 years or so, Australia has steadily become more disconnected. Australians are now significantly less likely to join a group, whether that's a social group, a civic group, or a political group. If you go back to the end of World War II, about half of Australians attended a religious service once a month or more frequently. And now that number is just 1 in 7. That just doesn't just have theological implications. People who attend religious services are more likely to donate and volunteer, even if you take out the donations and volunteering for religious causes. We've also seen a decline in the share of Australians involved in a trade union, down from half the workforce in the early 1980s to just 1 in 7 today. Again, that matters for community. Trade unions don't just push for better pay and conditions, but also help to act as the social glue in a workplace setting. We've seen a decline in the share of Australians playing an organised sport over the past 20 years. Roy Morgan surveys document declines in the share of people playing rugby league or netball, playing soccer or basketball. And at the same time, the things that have grown tend to be solitary activities, such as going to the gym or a walk on your own. We've seen a drop in the share of Australians who volunteer, down from around 35% at the turn of the millennium to around 25% now. We had a precipitous drop during COVID, but volunteering was declining even before that. And we've seen a decline in informal socialising. And when Nick Terrell and I wrote Reconnected, we re-administered a survey that had been done in the 1980s and the early 2000s that asked Australians how many of their neighbours they knew and how many close friendships they had. We were genuinely shocked to discover that the average number of neighbours that Australians know is half what it was in the mid-1980s. Ironically, that time when the TV show Neighbours just got going. As Neighbours goes off the air, Australians know half as many of their real neighbours. And friendships have fallen too. Australians say that there's about they have about half as many close friendships as they did in the mid-1980s. We've even seen a decline in volunteering, in donations, according to the taxable statistics. Dollars are going up a bit, largely due to inequality, but the share of Australians giving to charity appears to have fallen. And so on all of these metrics, Australia has become a little more disconnected. We've moved away from being a country of we towards becoming a country of me. Turns out you can even see this in the books that are written. If you use Google book search and do a massive search for the phrases used, the individualistic words me and I are increasing in frequency, while the collective words we and us are decreasing in frequency. Australia's communitarian spirit is even showing up in our literature. And that hasn't been helped by what we've seen over the past 9 years. When the Liberal government took office in 2013, it did so with a plan to scrap the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, a body which had been recommended by more than a dozen independent inquiries over the prior decade, and which enjoyed support from across the charity and not-for-profit sector. They continued trying to get rid of the Charities Commission, bringing legislation to the Parliament before finally realising it wouldn't pass the Senate. At that point, they replaced the well-respected Susan Pascoe with a head of the Charities Commission who had made his name as a charities critic, making that announcement in the hours after the passing of the same-sex marriage vote, when most of Australia was focused on something very different. Over the last 9 years, we've also seen 3 open letters from Australian charities complaining about attacks on the sector. Principally, these have been attacks on advocacy. And the attacks on advocacy became so strong that last year, a group of major Australian charities wrote to the United Nations, calling on help from the UN to have the former Australian government stop its attacks on charities. The war on charities essentially took the approach that when it came to advocacy, charities were to be seen and not heard, like naughty children. That approach, which took the view that a charity could be serving soup in a soup kitchen, but wasn't allowed to talk about the root causes of poverty. That an environmental charity was okay when it was planting trees, but it couldn't be allowed to talk about the root causes of deforestation. That a community legal centre could help individual clients, but couldn't be part of the conversation around law reform. That war on charities ended on the 21st of May. The Albanese government takes a much more positive approach towards charities. We want to work with charities and engage with the energy and the activism, the ideas the sector has for building a reconnected Australia. The challenges that I've outlined in terms of civic disconnection are big and deep-rooted. We need a whole of community effort to turn them around. Part of that starts with our ambition to double philanthropy by 2030. We want to work with organisations like Philanthropy Australia in order to build a stronger culture of giving. I'd like to see more Australian billionaires follow the lead of Andrew Forrest in signing up to the Giving Pledge. But I'd also like to see giving become more of a mass participation activity. I love initiatives such as Kids in Philanthropy, which encourage young Australians to give back to their local communities. As part of that fixing fundraising effort, we need to generate a culture of giving, and that might even involve some kind of a national campaign, akin to the Slip, Slop, Slap campaign that changed attitudes to skin cancer in Australia in the 1980s, or the Grim Reaper campaign that changed attitudes to HIV/AIDS. Fixing fundraising is a key part of ensuring that we increase philanthropy. One of the challenges that charities face right now is that our charity fundraising laws were written at a time when going online was something you did with wet washing, when a web was something that a spider wove. They're written for an age in which fundraising was largely a face-to-face activity. And therefore, if a charity seeks to raise money online, it now needs to register in 7 different jurisdictions in order to properly comply with fundraising laws. On one estimate, this is costing charities more than $1 million a month in compliance. There's not opposition to reform, but nor has there been the kind of strong action by the previous government that is necessary to achieve harmonisation. Since we've won office, I've written to state and territory ministers responsible for fundraising, urging them to work with their departments to get this done quickly. We've set out a series of principles that I hope will guide harmonised fundraising laws. And I've spoken to state and territory ministers who agree with me that we need to get this done in the interest of Australia's charities. I'm confident that there's the goodwill in place, that organisations such as Justice Connect and the hard work of Sue Woodward will finally come to fruition, and we will be able to harmonise those charitable fundraising laws. In the area of advocacy, we've said very clearly that we will not put gag clauses in social services agreements, and that where the current gag clauses exist, we'll either try to get them out or ensure that they're not enforced. That's because we have a very different view about advocacy than the former government. We see charities' voices in the public square as being an essential part of a strong, vibrant democracy. Good governments welcome charitable voices when they agree or disagree with them. Bad governments try to shut them down. It's no secret that Vladimir Putin is engaging in a crackdown on civil society, like every other autocrat around. The autocrat's playbook is to crack down on civil society voices. If you're confident about your ideas, you should be happy to welcome them being challenged by civil society groups. And that's why charitable advocacy is so important for the Albanese Labor government. We've announced too that we want to work with the sector in order to build capacity. We have a sector in the charitable not-for-profits sector that accounts for more than 1/10 of employment, for almost 1/10 of national output. A sector that engages 3 million volunteers. And so even a minute improvement in productivity can pay massive dividends. Nick Terrell and I took a stab at this when we wrote Reconnected a couple of years ago, drawing on the expertise of our roundtables around Australia, everywhere from Darwin to Hobart and Perth to Newcastle. We drew together charitable sector leaders in more than a dozen roundtables and asked them for their ideas about what worked and what might work for other organisations. Out of that came ideas such as Sutton's Law of Social Capital, double plus good, and the notion of cyber connecting. But that's just our ideas, and we'd like to do it more systematically, to draw together expertise to develop a charitable blueprint and ideas for the sector about boosting productivity. That will be spearheaded by an expert reference panel and by a series of roundtables that I'll be conducting over the course of next month around Australia. I want to meet with as many charity heads as I can to hear from the experts on the ground about what's working and what's not, what you need from government and what you can learn from one another. I want to reach out to charities with some of our ideas. We're not coming to you with a blank slate, but also to hear yours. We are coming to you with an open mind. We're keen to engage in ensuring that the laws are in place are as strong as possible, but also that we have the norms in place that encourage Australians to think naturally about helping their charities. whether that's helping with their time or their money. Australians are a generous people, but a busy people too. And we need to make sure that in busy lives, there is time carved out for engaging with the charity and not-for-profit sector. And at the end of the month, the head of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission has announced he's going to stand down. At that point, Deborah Jenkins will take over as the acting ACNC Commissioner. At the same time, we're kicking off an open and transparent process for the selection of the new head of the ACNC. I don't want to cherry pick the next head of the Charities Commission. I don't think that's good government. What I want to do is put in place an appropriate merit-based selection process conducted at arm's length from me in order to find somebody who is well suited to run this important Australian institution. Applications will be opening shortly. I encourage anyone who's interested to apply. I really hope that that process will instill confidence in the institution and ensure that we have somebody in place who is able to work collaboratively with the sector. Of course, the Charities Commission is the regulator, and it's really important for the charities that are doing the right thing. The charities that are doing the wrong thing are appropriately dealt with. We don't want a soft touch regulator. That wouldn't be good for the sector. But we do need an ACNC that is going to engage positively and collaboratively. An ACNC that will work respectfully with charities. That when it contacts charities, will allow them time to respond and give them an opportunity, the benefit of the doubt where there is concerns about whether they've done the right thing. A regulator that won't scare charities, but will ensure that the rules are followed. Those principles, I think, should guide the work of this important institution. Thank you for bringing together this important conversation. I apologise too for the fact that some of you will have attended Regulators Day yesterday and already heard me once on video screen and be thinking, how much video, Andrew, can I put up with in 2 days? But I'd love to take any questions you've got and any ideas you have about the specifics of what we're doing, but also about the broader picture, because it's that broader picture that's really important to me. And I'll leave you with one mental image. It is that when you go to the funeral of somebody who has lived a good life, lived into their 80s or their 90s, what gets talked about? At those funerals, it's not the awards and the honours the person received. It is how they made others feel, what they gave back to their community, how they treated their friends. And that, to me, suggests that community really matters and that rebuilding community is fundamental to a decent Australia. It turns out it'll make us richer because economies work better in high-trust environments. Turns out it'll make us healthier because people who have good friendship networks have better physical and mental health. But most importantly, it'll make us happier and more engaged with one another. It is fundamental to the notion of a good life. And so as we delve into the minutiae of charities regulation, I don't want any of us to lose track of the big picture, of a reconnected Australia in which we have more joining, volunteering, giving, and yes, more friends. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Now, we're very lucky. We don't just have video, Dr. Lee, today. He's live. So you have got the opportunity for questions, and we've got a microphone here. So just put your hand up if you have a question. Matthew Harding from Melbourne University.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, Minister. That was fantastic to hear every part of what you just said. I wanted to take you to the big picture that you sort of began with, of disconnectedness and the importance of reconnecting and the role of charities in making that happen and the need to raise public awareness of the importance of that. My observation is in recent years, there's been in public debate, and it's come from certain quarters, a narrative that tries to set up a sort of core case or understanding of charity as being something akin to handing money to a beggar on the street, and then kind of peripheral sort of quasi, not really charity things like advocacy or capacity building or engaging with government. And I think that's very regrettable. And obviously that narrative needs to be shut down if that kind of big picture that you outlined is to be achieved. I have started to wonder whether sort of part of the problem here lies in our persistent use of the language of charity itself, because charity in its lay sense can easily lend itself to that very transactional, I'm handing alms to the beggar sort of meaning. Do you think perhaps part of what we need to do here is think about moving away from charity as an organising concept towards more encompassing ideas like civil society, social capital, social good? Just some thoughts for you to reflect on, if you might.
Matthew, what an interesting question. Look, as I begin to answer it, let me look as though I'm trying to take off by waving my arm to turn the automatic light back on in my room. Excuse me for a moment. There we go. Okay. So a small simulation of a bird and the lights are back on. Matthew, I love your idea that I should do myself out of a title by changing the nomenclature. And the question, I suppose, is whether there's an alternative way of encouraging people to reconceptualize charity as community building. And, you know, when you go to the opera, often you're attending a service which is very well supported by charity, but people don't necessarily think of opera opening nights as being charity cases. When you go to many arts sector events or attend events which are focused on informing the way in which people think about the environment, those too are supported by charity. So I think I'd prefer to reconceptualise the notion of charity and community building. But I take your point that if the word is putting people off, we should encourage people in other ways. When Malcolm McCusker was Governor of Western Australia, he made philanthropy one of his main focuses and talked about giving back. Maybe giving back is the right frame that we should be focusing on. But to recognise too that this isn't just about supplementing the social safety net, it's about organisations that are able to do things that government can't. Think of the role of the Gates Foundation in pandemic preparedness, or the innovation that can come from organisations that are willing to try high-risk projects. I'm a big fan of randomised policy trials. One of the challenges government often has is when we run programs, people say, well, why are you putting people in the control group for a program you think works? But charities and non-profits don't face that challenge. So in some sense, they're often better able to test what works and what doesn't. And that brings me on to the broader effective altruism movement, which I think has been undercooked in Australia. I'm a big fan of Peter Singer and sites such as givewell.org, which try to look at the impact that charities are having on the ground, recognising that if we don't measure impact effectively, then we're going to fall into a more problematic world in which effective charities are those with low administrative overheads. I don't think admin overheads is a good way of measuring impact. So I'd much rather we look to measure impact directly. And I'd love to see a stronger, more thriving impact evaluation culture in Australia, which I think would then turn into getting more people giving back.
Thank you. And I'm just looking to Jess to see if there, no questions online. Any other questions in the room? Well, while people are thinking of a question, Dr. Lee, one that has come up or that people have asked a little bit is we've had a few reviews recently of the ACNC regulatory system most recently, and then there was a tax and not-for-profit concessions working group that came up with a series of suggestions, and before that the Productivity Commission had suggestions as well. Part of the exciting work that you're doing to look at how regulation can help better support build social capital. Are you pulling those reviews back out and considering whether we should be adopting the recommendations that are set out in them?
Look, it's a great question, and we have had that ACNC review, which the previous government responded to. Certainly, I'm open to the notion that there's maybe ideas there that we should pick up on, but I think we also have the Albanese government has a fundamentally different view of the role of the charity and not-for-profit sector than the Morrison government did. We have a much more expansive, energetic idea as to what charities and not-for-profit should do, and that then informs our view as to how the regulator should operate. We're very enthusiastic about growing the charity sector. I look at the number of startup charities in Australia and wish that we had more of them emerging. I'd like to see more opportunities for mentoring, more opportunities for using technology to connect people up. So all of that means I'm open to considering ideas which were left on the shelf by the former government, but my main focus is on bringing together new, fresh ideas through the expert reference panel, the roundtables that I'll be conducting across Australia next month, and the blueprint we'll be putting together.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Yes, we have one.
Hello, Minister. My name's David Stott. I'm from Well West, a charity down in Melbourne. My question's about where sport fits into all of this. There was a bit of a murmur from the room, okay. The sports sector has had trouble accessing donations in the past and being part of the narrative because they have to do it through this Transports Foundation, separate entity set up. I believe the ATO either has planned to or has fixed this to an extent by putting out a ruling that sport provides a health benefit, and that allows the sporting sector to thereby access these large philanthropic trusts, which by their rules are unable to donate to anything other than charity per se. But it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole. To fix it might require some pretty fundamental change of the tax acts, but I'm open to your thoughts of what the government might do about that.
Thanks very much, David. I think it's a great question, and it certainly goes to the way in which the DGR categories are set up. Clearly, if we were building the DGR categories from scratch today, they would look pretty different from what they do, and it's likely that health promoting sport would be in there. I'm interested in what Britain has done with their move to include charitable sport and their focus on ensuring that the sport provides a health benefit, which means you don't have chess, for example, and ensuring that it's open to participation for everyone. So an exclusive polo club doesn't get tax deductibility status. At the moment, we are where we are with the Australian Sports Foundation auspicing a lot of charitable giving, but I'm certainly open to the conversation as to how it might look, subject to some very tight budget constraints. If we're in the world of 20 years ago, in which there was surpluses and a mining boom, it would be much easier to do reform than it is when gross debt is hitting almost $1 trillion and there's a lot of pressure on the budget to reduce tax expenditures. My Treasury colleagues frequently remind me that we don't need to change any tax laws. If we double philanthropy, then we double the tax deductions associated with philanthropy. So that's got a huge budgetary cost already before I come to them with new ideas for expanding tax deductibility status. Not to say it's not a great idea, just to give you a realistic sense of where the budget stands and the challenge for DGR reform in that context.
My question's gone, you just answered.
Oh, there we go. You've already answered another question we had from the audience, so it was very efficient. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question here?
I've got a different one.
Bridget Cowling from Arnold Block Levi.
Hello, Minister Lee. Thank you for being here. I was going to ask, why don't we just give all charities tax deductible status? That will double your philanthropy and simplify everything straight away. But since you're not going to do that, it's a question perhaps about why we think about charitable donations as a cost to the taxpayer and what the analysis actually looks like when you think about all the services that are provided by charities and what that might otherwise cost the government. So I am really curious about the assumption. I'm sure you've got it backed up by all the information, but perhaps you could share it with us, that doubling philanthropy by increasing the ability for organisations to be tax deductible would really blow out the budget.
Richard, thanks very much for the question. Certainly, our aim is to double true philanthropy, not to double tax deductible philanthropy. You're absolutely right that if we could just expand the categories, then no one would need to change their behaviour. And if our goal was to double the size of the tax deduction, government could do that straight away. But of course, Bridget, you and I want to increase the amount of money that is truly given to charitable causes, the extent to which people see giving back to the community as being part and parcel of being a good citizen. Tax deductible status is there because organisations are regarded as providing a broad community benefit. So giving that, ensuring that community benefit is there for new organisations we're bringing in is really important. We just signed off on a number of new tax deductible status for organisations, including the Grace Tame Foundation. They're organisations working with the social sector space, which are providing a clear community benefit. But any time government makes a decision of providing tax deductible gift recipient status, we need to justify that to the community in terms of what the community is getting back. Because every time we do that, that's a little bit less tax revenue that needs to be raised through other sources. So I'm keenly aware, as my full title is Assistant Minister for Competition, Charities and Treasury, I'm keenly aware of making sure that all the DGR decisions stack up strongly in a Treasury lens as well as in a charity lens.
Well, I'm just conscious of time. I think, Jess, have we got any questions online?
We have one question.
Minister, do we have time for one more question?
I'm happy if you are.
Excellent.
So we have a question from Rosemary Langford, one of our panelists today. And the question is, do you think the complexity of the regulatory framework hinders the thriving of the charity sector? And will that be a consideration as part of this sort of new blueprint moving forward?
Thanks very much, Rosemary. I'm certainly keen to reduce complexity where we can. Part of the move to fixed fundraising is to get rid of the complexity of having to fill out 7 sets of state and territory paperwork. We need to simplify that, harmonise it, make it easier for charities that are fundraising online to do the right thing, but then get on with reaching out to their supporters. But there's also broader ways in which the ACNC could better fulfil its mission of, in some sense, being ASIC for charities. When ASIC was put in place, you saw the ceding of powers from states to the Commonwealth, and then you got that uniform regulation put in place from 1990. It wasn't that seamless with the ACNC, and so the extent to which things like the charitable passport and the notion that people should supply information once, which could then be used often, haven't been fulfilled to the extent they should. Any opportunities that we have to reduce unnecessary paperwork burdens on charities immediately improve the productivity of the sector and allow donors to know that more of their money is going to the causes that they love. So I'm keen to work on reducing unnecessary regulation. If you've got examples, Rosemary, please do send them through. And the same goes for anyone else on the call. Since I'm getting on the final question, let me just say thank you again for the opportunity to chat with you. I hope I'll see some of you at the Melbourne Community Building Forum that we'll be holding next month. And any time you want to reach out to me or my terrific Chief of Staff, Nick Terrell, please do feel free. We're keen to collaborate. The engagement that we're doing with charities is not about government stepping back while the charity sector steps up. It's about government and charities working in partnership to build a more connected Australia. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Minister. I think we've got a very exciting time ahead of us as an academic. I'm very excited. It sounds like the slate is wide open for all of our weird and wacky ideas to fix federalism whilst retaining flexibility in the charity system. So thank you so much for your time today.